Okay, everybody, welcome to the first ever episode of Drinking on the Edge, in which it's live. This will be our 11th episode. And not only is it live for the first time, we have more guests than ever before to talk about Grenache. With me here is, in order of Zoom screen appearance, Andy Abramson, checking in from, I believe it's Nevada.
Las Vegas.
Yes, sir. And he is been involved with Grenache in a way he will describe a little bit later, since 2012 in varying ways. Next up is Doug Frost, who's checking in from KC Mo. Hello, Doug.
Hey, how's it going?
Very well. And next to him, and lastly, but not leastly, we have Chester Osborne coming in from McLaren Vale, Australia.
Oh, man. And an old Roussanne, you say. You've got some old Roussanne in front of you. I'm super, super jealous.
Yeah. At the end of the day, after drinking red for the last, 10 hours or whatever.
Well, I here with my producer, Matt Rosenberg, here at Drinking on the Edge, are in possession of 10 different samples, one of which is made by Doug, 2 of which is made by Chester, and a wide range of others coming from France, Spain, in addition to the ones coming from Doug and Chester in Australia and the U.S. I'm just going to keep these very knowledgeable fellows in line, but they're going to run the chat here. We got general themes to follow, and so after introducing yourselves a little bit, I'm going to ask you to talk about this under-acknowledged noble and global grape. So jump in, guys.
Well, I'm the rank amateur, so I'm not going to say a damn thing unless I have to. I've only been making Grenache for a few years, and our vines are relatively young, and so I'm a baby. So Chester ain't. Not talking about it in relative age, but experience, understanding, and knowledge.
I'm going to start this. I'm going to start because I know Chester can talk for a mile. I'm going to have a bit of a cava that was graced upon me by folks at Bodega San Valero. It's a Particular. It's a Blanc de Noir. It is not available in the U.S., and it is delicious. Andy, can you give us a little perspective about this grape that is Grenache? A little bit of history, please.
Grenache is I like to call it the global grape or the great grape of Grenache. It's the other red grape. We don't often think of Grenache because we think of Grenache as it comes out in things like Chateauneuf de Pape, or it's in a lot of Spanish wines, Australian wines. I've had the good fortune to taste Grenache on at least 4 continents, but it's grown on 6 of the 7. It's literally one of the world's most widely planted grapes. I've had the good fortune to actually taste wine at a Rosenberg dinner in Adelaide back in 2013. It was held in some restaurant. You may have been there, Chester. But I had lunch the next day, earlier that day, at Solomon's Gorge with 5 or 6 winemakers, including the folks from Rosenberg, Gangara, Chapel Hill. And of course, it's also grown widely across North America in places like Walla Walla, Washington, next year's home of Hospice de Rhone. It's grown in Paso Robles and Santa Barbara County, where the wines that I make, which include Grenache with Doug Marjoram and the Marjoram Wine Company, are made. And I've actually won some awards with them. It's grown in Arizona. It's grown in Texas. It's grown in Baja California. I've had Grenache wines from places I haven't been, like South America. But I've also found them in Sardinia, where they call it Cananal. So when you taste Grenache, you're not locked in. And I agree with Chester. Some of the finest Grenache wines I've personally tasted have come from McLaren Vale. They have a unique flavor profile to them because, well, it's that down under approach that makes them so interesting and so vibrant. David, you tasted a bunch of wines at the Grenache du Monde event in September.
This being one of them. And that's why I asked them to leave me a bottle, please. Because again, they're not imported, and they are.
No, some of them are. Some of them aren't.
Yeah.
We each tasted 80 wines, not the same, as we judged them about a month earlier or 2 months earlier. There were 80 judges tasting 80 wines. Phenomenal, different. The Italian ones were superb, as were the Spanish and the French. The U.S. was underrepresented, I would say. But Grenache is the global grape.
Got that, Doug. And this kind of brings up a point that Andy kind of was leaning towards, and that is that something that I know is important to you, and that is the diversity of styles that this grape can offer is pretty much one of the greatest you'll find in the world of any wine grape.
Yeah, for sure. I personally, we make several different wines from Grenache. We make a rosé, okay, and I would say that in the U.S. at least, a sort of lack of understanding of Grenache or the general capabilities of Grenache have led people to presume that, and this is going back some years ago, when I would talk about Grenache, people would always go, "Oh, I love Grenache rosé," and I'm like, okay, that's good that you do. Nice pat on the head. However, there are these other wines. I don't know, one called Priorat, another one called Chateauneuf de Pape, and you probably drink a decent amount of Côte de Rhône too, and they'd be like, oh, and so there still is, I think, a delayed understanding in the U.S. of what Grenache is capable of. Amongst the intelligentsia, obviously, that's very different. But I have to even though I want to hear more about the butter churn trophy, I think I will openly admit that the wine that you just poured, David, was inspired by McLaren Vale Grenache. I fell in love with McLaren Vale Grenache 10, 15, 20 years ago. Literally about 10 years ago, went to McLaren Vale to go, what the F are you people doing? This is delicious. These wines are amazing. I need to know more. And so when I got offered a chunk of a vineyard in the Rocks district
of Walla Walla Valley, Washington.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sub-district, sub-AVA of Walla Walla, and it's a distinctive place. And I'll explain why. Well, I guess explain why right now. Okay, it's rocks. It looks like rocks. It looks like Chateauneuf de Pape. And famously, a certain winemaker, the guy who, Christophe Baron, discovered, quote unquote, the rocks when an apple orchard was being torn up and these big pudding stones, whatever, were popping up out of the ground. He said, "Oh, sacre bleu, this is Chateauneuf de Pape, and I must plant Grenache." A little bit of a story. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So the truth of the matter is it does look very much like Chateauneuf de Pape, and I can pop pictures up if you want to, but anybody can find pictures of the rocks online. But here's the thing: when Chateauneuf de Pape, you'll see those rocks, and then you go down like 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, whatever, and you get the marl, limestone clay, water holding capacity. If you go down 6, 8, 10 feet in the rocks, you know what you get? Rocks. You go down 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, more rocks. And it's a very different area. And indeed, the characteristic, and David, you're having some of the wine right now. I saw the characteristic of that wine is distinctly roxy. Okay, by roxy, we mean it has this sometimes bloody iron rose petal. It's so distinctive that I basically think you can pick any wine grown in the rocks that's fermented on its skins and hand it to somebody, and anybody who's knowledgeable will go, "Oh, rocks, huh?" That's maybe possibly a singular aspect of the terroir of rocks. We talk about terroir all the time, but rocks is, I'll put it this way. We picked this early because one of the things I don't like about rocks is high pH. We picked this early because I wanted to make sort of the expressively, exuberantly fruity style that I think McLaren Vale can make. And as I say, was openly inspired by that. And I also just didn't want a high alcohol. I wanted my alcohols to be reasonable. I know Grenache can be expressive at 16, but I also felt like Grenache can be expressive at 12.8, which is what that wine is. So I wanted to show all that. And to some degree, therefore, I did everything I could to suppress the Rocks district character. And Rocks don't give a shit. Rocks don't care. Rocks is like, I'm here anyway. Shut up, wine boy. And I find that fascinating, a little, distressing on some level, but also maybe to some degree proof of terroir. And so we make several Grenache, and we make one bigger, more intense style because it's grown hillside. And with all due respect, I think Grenache does care where it's grown and does speak to where it's grown. And so that hillside stuff, in head-trained hillside stuff, exposed to wind, exposed to just very exposed, grows thicker skins, makes a bigger wine. And I have to acknowledge that, I have to respect that. This Rocks District vineyard, on the other hand, where we make the one you just poured, because my hillside Grenache isn't ready yet. That one, my favorite line, and Chester, forgive me, because I'll attribute this to Stephen Pinnell, because he's the one who said this, but I howled at the time. He said to me when I said, "This Grenache is just so pretty. It's almost like almost like Pinot Noir. And he said, Grenache fulfills the promise Pinot Noir only makes. It's like, yes.
Well, you're in the pocket there with your Echolands brand Grenache that I'm tasting. That's Echolands, one word for those of you who want to seek it out. It is distributed in many U.S. states. Go find it. Go order it from the winery. Echolands. So yeah, and going back to the issue of diversity here, I just poured a white Grenache. Now it's not a Grenache made from a red Grenache grape. It's actually made from the variety called Grenache Blanca or Grenache Blanc, and it is indeed a white wine. So let's go back to this. There are different types of Grenaches. Most of them is the red one. But what kind of wines would we be expecting if someone goes for Grenache and they see that it's white, maybe it's pink? What are the different things that Grenache can do? Obviously, I just had a bubbly cava made from one. That was from the red Grenache. But what else is available there in the world of Grenache, guys?
You have rosé, obviously. You have Grenache Blanc. You have Grenache Blanc in blends. In Spain, you'll find it blended with Macabou. In France, you'll find it blended with everything from Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier. Same thing in California. You can drink it all by itself as a pure Grenache Blanc. And then, of course, you have Grenache Gris, which often gets overlooked, the gray grape. There's some phenomenal Grenache Gris being grown in the Roussillon, and we're starting to see a little of it in California. To me, there's some of the amazing Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris blended together. Domaine de la Rectory in the town of Banyuls makes some phenomenal Grenache Gris-based wines. When we hold International Grenache Day, something Chester's familiar with, every year on the third Friday of September, something that started at the Grenache Symposium in 2010 by a bunch of winemakers, including Walter McKinley of Domaine de Morchamp and Nicole Rollet from Chêne Bleu, do a renaissance.
Who, by the way, she was an earlier guest of ours. Even thought about.
Oh, good.
I thought about roping her in for this, but she's got lots of things on her plate.
So much over there.
Can I just say, while we're on that Grenache Day, when I came up with that idea in that symposium, I said that it was important that everyone wore a loud shirt in honor of Grenache because Grenache is loud and fun. And unfortunately, when they put it out there, they forgot that bit. And unfortunately, it's a very important part because you could just go to work, any law firm or any business, and just wear a large shirt because it's Grenache Day. And that would have been important. Whereas International Grenache Day, and we're not going to bring a bottle of Grenache to work, eh? So it was an important part that was missed. And I really hope that one day, I keep trying to tell people that
I'll bring that up this year and we'll make it ugly shirt. Call that Ugly Shirt Day.
Yeah, we do that. We have that here in the U.S. as Ugly Shirt Day. But hey, this Garnacha Blanca that I'm having is actually from the Cariñena region of Spain, which I've always found very confusing because it makes me think it's all about Carignan or Cariñena grape. It's not necessarily.
It was once. It was once, but the 19th century screwed that up. So,
well, this one I got here again, not imported into the U.S., is absolutely terrific. Corona di. My God, Aragon. There you go.
There you go.
So what other kind of styles have we talked about? Garnacha Blanca and Gris making the whites. We got the bubbly white made from Grenache red, and we got Grenache noir, and then we have the rosés we've been talking about. There's also something called Rive Saut and other sweet wines made from the grape.
Hell yeah.
Well, you've got Ramage, which in Banyuls, which is the late harvest Grenache made in the open top demijohns that sit on top of wineries like the Etoile Cooperative at the heart of Banyuls and made by many producers. My good friend and colleague when I make wines, Doug Marjoram, it's one of the few wines that actually goes with chocolate.
Very well,
think
too.
about it. And yes, it does go very
Good
well.
call.
And that's the diversity of Grenache. You can have it as a sparkler. You can have it as a rosé. You can have it as a white by itself, a white in a blend, a red by itself, a red in a blend, or you can have 100% of it as a sweet wine. But the reality is when someone makes a Cabernet, they say, I'm a Cabernet winemaker. No one walks around and says, I'm a Grenache winemaker. They say, I'm a winemaker. And yeah, one of the grapes I work with is Grenache. And that, I think, is we're understated and underrepresented, but certainly not underappreciated.
I don't know whether in Australia right now, but the last couple of years, the most expensive grape variety in Australia is Grenache.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
I had no idea. Isn't that wild? And the most expensive grape variety in McLaren Vale for 5 years now has been Grenache, and in Barossa Valley as well.
What do you reckon?
The most
What do you reckon?
variety.
What do you reckon the reason is for that, Chester? Is it consumer demand, limited availability, other things?
Supply and demand.
Oh, there you go.
It's supply and demand, but also the whole movement toward Pinot Noir. And there's Pinot Noir grown in a lot of areas where it probably shouldn't be. And so I suppose it's a little, sure, and not worth the money, price per ton. But Pinot Noir and Grenache are almost interchangeable sometimes. As you mentioned before, someone mentioned before how it's like the Pinot Noir that actually delivers now. The Grenache is like one that delivers. But and it has a little bit more earth, a little bit more richness. It can be so perfumed long and lengthy. So I think people are really getting on board with Grenache in Australia now. And of course, there's been a proliferation of wineries in Australia due to the wine equalisation tax rebate. And that's a whole story where anyone who sells $1.5 million worth of wine, they get tax, they get all their tax given back to them. So we've had a proliferation of wineries, and sort of Grenache has been the thing that a lot of people have ran on. And there's a whole pendulum. Back a while ago, the Australian wine style was often really big and rich and oily and thick and ripe and oaky. And now it's gone right the other pendulum. Right now it's all about fragrance and really beautiful upfront fresh flowers and juice and just drinkability as 1 year old, 1.5 year old wine. And so Grenache just fits into that mold perfectly, as does a lot of, I can see a derelict vineyard pulling out right now. Beautiful. Of course, that derelict vineyard is actually quite expressive. There's a lot of Grenache in it. But these are really old vines, like 50 to 110-year-old vines. It needs air. Twirl it and give it so much air you can. It does have tannins, but they're amazing tannins. They have like really spicy, gritty, fragrant things. And this is where I think right now we're starting to see that pendulum from that really juicy, fragrant, young, just no tannin at all area to come back now into where we are, which is still bright fruit, lots of spice, but more terroir and more tannin, more of this and more grittiness, more that really like long, like satisfying thing that you can go on and on.
I've also have your custodian here. Should I have opened that first? What do you think?
Oh, look, my advice to you is start drinking heavily.
Okay, Andy, Doug, can you jump in there and join Chester on kind of defining what the average person can expect when they're, okay, I'm listening to Grenache, but these guys ramble on about Grenache, but what can I expect or what should I be looking for in terms of what's it going to smell? What's it going to taste like? What's it going to feel like? What's going to be comparable to in terms of wines I already know? If I'm consider myself unfamiliar with Grenache, what should I be looking for? What should I expect?
Yeah, I always tell people start with a wine that's very similar to a Côte d'Rhône or a Côte d'Rhône. It provides, it's the entry gateway wine to being an oenophile who understands Grenache, because so much of it is Grenache, even though you'll find other grapes in there like Syrah, Mourvèdre, Cinsault, Counoise, etc. The wine I make has those 5 grapes, led by Grenache with 75 to 77% of it usually being Grenache, and then the rest a medley. It's a nightmare for when you're blending so many different ones because you're looking to get it. No, I would then try and find a pure Grenache, a 100% Grenache, something that Chester makes, or the folks at Yangar's High Sands is a wonderful example of Grenache down under. As you go through different parts of the world, what are you going to taste? You're going to taste fruit. That's the very first thing that you're going to get when you drink a well-made Grenache, especially if you let it age a little bit and do something else. Chill it down first. Don't let it be sitting on the counter at 75, 80 degrees, because Grenache is an alcoholic grape and it does run hot. So we always love to chill it down, make sure it's at cellar temperature, which is 55, not 85. People don't realize that too often. Second thing you're going to probably get is some type of spice. Similar to Pinot Noir, you're going to get that very light spice, a little bit of herbs, but not a lot. And mostly what you're going to get is structure and body. All of those things tend to come through in a well-made Grenache. Why do people like it? Because it goes so well with many different foods. It is something you can drink by itself. You can have with charcuterie and cheese. You can have it with a rich stew, a grilled piece of steak.
You've mentioned, all of you, in different forms, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, these are two very different red grapes and making very different wines. So what is it about Grenache that either resembles or doesn't in terms of its structure? You guys, nobody's mentioned the word tannin. Bring it on.
Well, no, I think Chester has. Chester has talked about that.
Chester's talked a lot about it.
I heard structure. Yeah, I didn't hear tannin in regards to Grenache, how it compares, we say, to Pinot Noir or Cabernet. So
it doesn't compare to Cabernet. The Cabernet example was that the winemakers lead with the expression, I make Cabernet, whereas no winemakers don't lead. I'm a Grenache winemaker. The comparison I drew, David, was that Cabernet producers are like Harvard grads. They tell you they were there, whereas a Grenache producer isn't so flagrant. Jim Clendenin, the late Jim Clendenin of Albon Clement, was a huge advocate of Nebbiolo.
You cannot extract too many tannins in Grenache because they are all about spice and grit and fragrance. So you can just leave it there to get them all. And all they're going to do is open up to be more and more fruit way down the track and just lengthen out that wine even further than you can imagine. And I'm drinking 1960s Grenache. In fact, that the last few months I've been showing off 1973 and 1989 Grenache wines, Grenache-based wines, and people keep going like, "Wow, that's pretty amazing that Grenache can be that amazing old." But it has the perfect talents for aging because they are spicy, gritty, and fragrant. And Grenache is one of the most sensitive varieties to environment, just like Pinot Noir is and Nebbiolo is. That I think I put Grenache in the same sort of area. That they're really sensitive to the environment and very sensitive to the year. They show the year much stronger than what Cabernet or Shiraz or Merlot or other varieties will. So you'll see this enormous difference in it. But great old vine vineyards, so just keep churning out amazing wines with these amazing gritty tannins. And we have lots of different geologies in the Macomb, and the earthiness you can get into Grenache. But some people find it overwhelming sometimes, that earthiness. Of course, we all know Priorat and how amazing those earth and that volcanic geology. It's like peat and soot and iron and complexity and earth and town. Of course, it has carrying often in there too. But Grenache can be so expressive of the geology, and I love it. In sandstone in Macomb, which is only a 2.4 million year old geology, it's really earthy. In limestone, it's more blocky, but the limestone always has a grey earth or a red earth on top. Red earth will give you blood and iron, and the grey earth will give you really earthy characters. And then there's the Blewett Springs region, which you mentioned the high sands from Pete Fraser, from Yangara in inland, and that's higher altitude. It's deep sand. So it doesn't have a lot of tannin. It's much more about perfume, but they're quite old vines, so they're growing along the clay that is underneath the sand and getting a bit of tannin. You know, it shows its terroir so beautifully. So much fun, Grenache.
I found that
you just nailed though, Chester.
I
think what you just nailed. Hold on, David. Is that Grenache grows in all different climatic conditions and
really
all
does.
Different soil-like conditions. I've got 100% Grenache I made that has 3 different vineyard sources, some close to the Pacific Ocean and some 10 miles inland on the other side of Highway 101 in Santa Barbara County. And the percentages we used were slightly different. And each, when we were doing the blending, and again, sort of like what goes on in the Rhone Valley or in Australia or anywhere, is all of a sudden, you're not just saying a third, it was 40% of this, 45% of that, and 15% of the most powerful one, because you wanted to put everything in balance. And the beauty of Grenache, just like Doug's making wine in the Walls District, which is some of the most phenomenal wines coming up. And I hope to see you at Hospice de Rhone in April next year when it's there. the greatness of it is the terroir comes through, and you can definitely tell when you're drinking a wine from the Walls District versus a Grenache-based wine from Santa Barbara County, or a wine from Australia or France's Rhone Valley. And then, of course, Spain, you were talking about Priorat, but Grenache is grown in many other places around Spain. Campo de Borja, the Tres Picos wine from Campo de Borja, I've been drinking for 20-some years when it used to be $3.99 a bottle.
Exactly. Stupid, crazy value.
Widely available, widely available in the United States.
Widely available here. One of the wines that we tasted at the Grenache du Monde, it was something that's been around. When I walk up to the winemaker, I said, you changed your bottle. There's also Las Rocas, rather. There's Las Rocas, which is similar in structure and quality. I drank one that was 17 years old to go to Chester's point about ageability. Yeah. That's the great thing here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm glad you brought those, particularly those two wines up, Tres Picos, but the wines, the Garnaches of Calatayud, to me, have been special for a long time. Like you said, Andy, they age extremely well, but there's a distinctive mineral character that is, I think, of the place and speaks of the place. And as you said, rocks screams itself. And I think what we're talking about, David, is exactly this bounding diversity of style, that Grenache's ability to be expressive in so many different environments, as Andy and Chester are explaining. For me, I do look for a through line, though, of a focus on red fruits. I look for a through line of some sort of pepper character, whether it's white pepper or black pepper. Those things are going to be dependent upon, as Andy said, how the winemaker deals with it, where it comes from, et cetera, et cetera. But I do actually look for an herbal note. Particularly, there'll be often this little strand of mint that kind of hides in there and gives me that a greater sense of that freshness. I think when people are trying to suss out the Grenache they have in front of them, I hate to be this way, but I'm going to admit it. I'm a guy who probably looks at alcohol a little too much. If you turn the bottle around like a Priorat and 16.5, okay, it says 15.8, they lie, whatever. But it's going to be this big, brawny, intense wine that still carries minerality, because that's the magic of Priorat, that still carries some sense of freshness, again, magic of Priorat. And conversely, as you go down the scale and you get into these lower alcohol versions, as Chester said, and very much, as I was trying to say, it inspired me to try to do something similar. You saw that pendulum swing in Australia, these incredibly fresh, vibrant wines, and now people are finding perhaps a middle ground. As that alcohol level gets lower, expect more of that cranberry note, not a cooked cherry pie kind of note, but more cranberry and red currant and even watermelon and things like that. And nonetheless, I think a wine that's fragrant, aromatic, perfumed, and friendly as hell. I think that even at those high levels of alcohol, Grenache has this just expansive personality that lets you come in. It is not a monolithic wine, as we're beating Cabernet Sauvignon up a little bit for being, that demands your respect. Grenache just wants to sidle up next to you and insist you pour another drink.
I would argue too that Pinot Noir is that same old problem a little bit too, depending now that it's so popular and everybody's trying their hand at it. And to me, for the thousands of wines I've tasted in my career and in my previous, just as an enjoyer of wine, to me, Grenache is a safer bet, at least when it comes to, so we say, problematic tannin issues, which Cab certainly has, Pinot can have in its own way. Grenache is a safer bet. It hugs a bigger middle in terms of structural issues. As a consumer or as a professional, I find Grenache, again, is a good safe zone, really good safe zone.
Yeah, I think it has that spiciness too. One of the things that all those characters you're all talking about there, but that spiciness and that rich spiciness really helps to build the whole thing together. It gives it extra, the flavor. It's never a light grape. It doesn't really matter even when you crop it quite high. It's never light. It always has a reasonable amount of texture and thickness to it. You don't want too much thickness. That's what the beautiful thing is when Andy was talking about it and Doug was talking about it. is that you don't want to pick it too ripe because it already has so much weight. You just don't need to do that. Our biggest problem often is from the really low yielding vineyards that are 100 years old and they're getting half a ton an acre or whatever, is actually we don't want to pick it too ripe. But if we don't pick it ripe enough, the acid is so high, we can't get the ferment to finish and the malo to happen because it's 3.0 pH.
Jesus.
So we've got a problem there. We have to pick it at like 14.5, 15, those vineyards like that, or we're stuffed. But most of the Grenache we pick in McLaren Vale is 3.1, 3.2 pH, which is just so beautiful to work with.
We've been talking, there is a lot of talk about old vines in this throughout the world, and the old vines make better wine. Old vines can only be found in certain places, and there's a whole thing going on for old vines. So what is it with Grenache? Grenache is one of those grapes you'll find that encompass the old vine world. What is there about Grenache, older vines versus newer plantings that may have a difference or maybe not? I don't know. It's up for conversation. And what is the magic that it may or may not have in its older form?
I think the older the vines, the deeper the roots and the more expressive of the geology. And that doesn't matter whether it's Grenache or anything. It's just every single vine that's growing in a site. When it's young, it's more about the soil. And then as it's older, it's more about the geology underneath. And the geology always gives much more complexity. And Grenache being a fruity variety, then when it's in the soil area, it's not as interesting as when it's in the geology area.
The subsoil.
When it's down there. Yeah, exactly. What's underneath the sandstone or the limestone or whatever's down there, capstone, whatever. And you start to get soot and iron and peat and chocolate and dark characters that are complex, even woody characters that can be really woody and quite exotic tannins that are really, really interesting. So that's what I find old vines showing. It's unfortunate that winemakers often say, I don't know about this old vine thing. I don't think they make better wine. I just think they're naive. And I even believe that oak is almost artificial old vine character often. I think that it's like the peat and the soot and whatever you get from oak and the woodiness and the tannins, whatever, is like you can get the same characters from really beautiful old vines. But of course, as it ages, it turns into amazing character, whereas oak never turns into fruit character again, whereas it opens up. It's like cheating almost. And so that's why my wines don't really have any oak much in them. You never see oak in them.
Yeah, it's part of the old
wine.
Part of the old vine thing that I discovered is that over the years is that I was an early, relatively speaking, early discoverer of these old Grenache or Garnacha vines outside of the city of Madrid in the Great Mountains. And I'm tasting now this Marañones wine that I was gifted. And there's, again, people are in the hunt for older vines or undiscovered ones. You get new appellations, new producers. So 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, nobody outside of the area, outside of Madrid area, would have these wines or think anything of it. They were just easy drinking old vines up in the really rocky granite mountains up there. And now they're selling for high prices.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sierra de Gredos it's got some lovely other wines as well, not just Garnacha, but really special Garnacha.
I don't know about Doug, but almost all the wines that I've made, all the wines I've made have always been in second or third year barrels. I eschew oak. I'm not a fan of new oak at all on wine. I prefer wines that are made in tank or even in amphora these days, where you let the grapes do the work, not the wood do the talking. And the challenge that a lot of people have, especially here in the US, is we've been educated about oak. Robert Parker was the big proponent of oak because of Cabernet and Bordeaux. And what people don't realize is a lot of the best wines that they're drinking, Chateauneuf de Papes, the Priorates, are made either in neutral oak or no oak at all. And that's something which, the comment about oak, we're not here to, oak is designed to extract and bring out the fruit so it overrides the fruit tannins and we begin to get something very enjoyable. It works for something like Cabernet. Yes, it can work for some Grenaches, but for the most part, the less oak inspired a wine is that has Grenache in it, or even Syrah or Mourvedre, the more life it has. And one of the things that I actually believe is that oak eventually shortens the life cycle of the fruit. Doesn't it, when I say shortens it, how long it's going to live in the bottle. And we've all had, Chester was talking about having some wines from the 60s and 70s. And that's one of the great things. We've done some wine dinners we put on a series of wine dinners in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I'm going to buy the new wine based on how great the old wines taste. Well, that's the beauty of Grenache. You bring an older bottle from the same producer and you show them 10, 12 years older. And the consumer or the sommelier or the buyer says, wow, this is something I'd love to have. Well, but
yeah, Andy, I really do think you're right about that. I'm, as I said, I'm fussing around with a hillside Grenache, and it's seeing not new oak, but it's seeing some 1-year-old and 2-year-old and puncheons, 500 liters as opposed to 225s. The Grenache that David has from us basically sees no oak. We handpick, we destem, I foot stomp the stuff, and then we drain it into beer drums because I'm trying to retain just a little bit of the prickle from ML. And we're in a shared facility, so ML offers itself rather freely, just like yeast do, maybe to a great degree to my chagrin. But nonetheless, it runs itself through ML, and then I try to keep a little bit of the prickle from it by keeping it in beer drums. Now, I'll take about a third or half out and stick it in these neutral puncheons just for a couple of months, just to let the wine stretch out a bit, because it doesn't have necessarily the reductive problems that Syrah has. You want to be careful about that too. And I really just like you said, I like the fruit. I don't want to F it up by smothering up, putting a bunch of spicy oak notes on there when the spice of the fruit, as Chester said, is the damn reason we're here.
I think back to the very first Grenache I probably can remember drinking. It was pure Grenache, and it was Randall Graham's Clos de Gilroy, which saw no oak. And you know, and Randall I've known since the 80s when he came to my friend Steve Leviner's restaurant Odeon in Philadelphia for a lunch we had. And it was such an always lovely, easy drinking. I think the first one was an 85 or an 86 that I had, but it showed what Grenache can do. Just like Chester's wines that are pure of fruit and pure of heart. The winemaker's heart is in the bottle of Grenache.
I like that's awesome.
So hey, you know that symposium we're at, and Nicole said we need to have a movie to promote Grenache. Well, and on the flight back, we were talking 12 years ago. On the flight back, I conceptualized the movie, but I didn't ever get round to writing it until COVID came. And I kept adding over the years, I kept adding ideas. And then actually where I'm sitting right now, I spend a month, 4 days a week, just for 4 or 5 hours writing this movie script or whatever, story about the unbelievable Grenache. And it describes how we have souls right from the Big Bang, right through to how they get transferred between people and how they end up in inanimate objects. And the inanimate objects help us make the most amazing Grenache. It's called the unbelievable Grenache. But the whole way through it, it's all about Grenache, the whole thing. So one day, the book's nearly finished. It's coming out in a little while, and hopefully I've got a new producer wanted to turn it into a movie back a while ago, but I haven't heard from him for a while. But we need to get a movie out there promoting Grenache.
Thank you, Doug. Who am I? Shouldn't have caught that. So no, this meeting all came about on the heels of the annual Grenache Day that happened earlier this month, and it'll be happening again every year. It's been in existence, I believe, since 2013. And I know
2011 was the very first one. Was 2011,
and Chester was instrumental in that development as well.
Chester came up with the idea.
Well, there you go.
The thing is, Chester picked the date for September because there's nothing going on in the Australian wine world in September other than a lot of drinking, and to the chagrin of all the winemakers in France,
in the northern hemisphere,
because we're picking.
Yep, northern versus southern disputes. We get that here in the U.S. Specifically too. So again, people should be looking out for International Grenache Day every October.
No, every third Friday of every September.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Third Friday.
And we're allowed to remember. You got to wear a
David. It starts the Thursday because the Australians are Friday when it's our Thursday. and it goes through the whole weekend. But as I like to say, you should have Grenache every day.
There you go. And having the third week keeps you from ever landing on Friday the 13th. Very good. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest in Grenache. Thanks for being on Drinking on the Edge. Andy Abramson, Doug Frost, Chester Osborne.
Hey, cheers. Always love talking about Grenache.
Cheers, everybody.